Somebody recently asked me, how did Generation X travel back in the day when they were in their late teens or early 20s? Now, I can't speak for everyone, but I can tell you as a member of Generation X and as a member of Black Generation X, that back in the day when we had no GPS, no satellite radio, and no forms of communication from that standpoint, that for us, these were challenging and interesting times in terms of how we traveled. It was a great example of our independence and our survival skills, and it's something that you can never truly appreciate unless you've experienced it yourself. So let's get started. First, for purposes of me describing it, I want to make sure I set it in context so that this way you can follow along accordingly. For me, I grew up in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, and I went to school at a small school in Tampa called the University of Tampa. I drove with my college buddy from Pine Bluff, Arkansas to Tampa, Florida, which is roughly about 900 miles, and it's about a 14-hour drive. And I will tell you, this was my mechanism for traveling back and forth. Now, interestingly enough, after my freshman year, I would ride the bus back and forth. But when I got my first car in 1991, guess what I did? That's right. I drove back to Tampa, and while I was in graduate school at the University of South Florida from 93 to 95, that was my mechanism. So for a good 8-year time period, driving back and forth from Pine Bluff to Tampa, Florida was my norm. And I can tell you it was a unique challenge. But it wasn't unique for me because if you remember Generation X, making those types of long power road trips was the norm. It was a great example of our independence. But because I was driving through areas that had a history behind them with regards to certain hostilities against people of color, I had to be mindful of how I moved as well. So I want to share with you how this travel often took form. First, let's talk about how do we actually get there. Maps. And you're thinking, okay, for some of you, you may be thinking about MapQuest. Nope, go back older than that. We're talking about physical maps. And there were 3 ways you could get them: AAA, Rand McNally, or Atlas. Let's talk about AAA. For those of you who may have heard of AAA offers a roadside service to assist you if your car breaks down. Some people don't realize is that, and I don't know if they still do, there was a point in time that AAA would actually provide you mapping service. So if you needed to figure out how to get from point A to point B, you could contact AAA, and they literally could provide you a map that laid out all of the directions and turns that you needed to get to from point A to point B. I did that with my buddy my first year because my mom had a AAA account, and I think his parents did too. But after that, I didn't rely on it as much. I then relied on the other 2 forms which were common at the time, Rand McNally and Atlas. Now, for those of you who don't know, Atlas was more of a geographical-based map, meaning it was, for me, it literally gave you a map of a region. So for me, it was the Southeast region. Or you could get a statewide map, like a Florida map and so forth. But for me, it was a regional map. So I literally had a map that took me from Arkansas all the way to Florida. Rand McNally, which is what you could get in almost any convenience store or any gas station, would give you a map of the city. So this was great. And for me, because I knew I had to travel between a couple of locations, Jackson, Mississippi, Mobile, Alabama, Tallahassee, Florida, I now had a map that gave me the ability to navigate in those areas, specifically in terms of side streets, back streets, whatever the case may be. And this way I would know ahead of time if I needed to go a particular place where I could go because I had a map I could rely upon. Trust me, if you talk to anyone who's Generation X and they did any type of traveling, if you were to look in their glove compartment back in the day, you were going to find at least 2 or 3 maps. Folded up, stuck in the back, because that's how we maneuver. Remember, no GPS at the time. We didn't have any of those nice bells and whistles that were going to guide us there. We had to become experts at land navigation, and this is how we did it. So now that you've got your maps, you also have to keep in mind that maps is only one part of it. You also had to be mindful that if you were going to a location that required you to maneuver, and let's just be clear, for us back in the day, there was very, very few straight shots to go from point A to point B. You needed to be mindful of where you needed to turn if you needed to. So land nav became a part of our DNA. And part of that land navigation was landmarks. We started determining where is something in proximity to where we're going to eventually have to turn. So whether it be a school or a restaurant or just maybe some random tree or some random body of water, these things became crucial because in order for us to know where we were going to need to turn next, we needed to have a reference point. And this is how we got it. Now that you've got that, you keep in mind, maps, landmarks, great. Still need a little bit more. What roads are you traveling on? Remember, in most instances, when we had people talking to us, they would tell us number-based roads. So they would say, road 13 or 14, whatever the case may be. But you have to remember, what type of road? Was it county road, state road, US highway, or interstate? Now, for those of you who are like, why does that matter? It matters a whole lot, because what it matters based on what road you're traveling on, you are going to learn quickly what types of issues you need to be mindful of. If you were on a county road, those roads were predominantly 2 lanes. They almost always went through places where there was almost hardly any people there. There was almost nothing in readily proximity to the area. And here's the thing you need to be mindful of. If you're on a county road and break down, there's a good chance you're going to be out there by yourself. And so that was important. State roads and county roads, a lot of times we knew the designation because the number would be encapsulated in a circle. So if it was County Road 13, it'd be a circle with 13 in it. You knew that was a county road. State roads, it usually was the outline of the state and the number inside it as well. Again, state roads were kind of hit or miss. Like some state roads would be 2 lanes, some state roads would be 4 lanes. It just depended. Same thing. Some of the same issues that you have with like county roads. You're probably going to find yourself going through a lot of back road areas and so forth. Going to have greater connections to more established towns. But in this particular instance, you're still dealing with back roads. Once you hit US highways, it gets a little bit better. Most of your US highways, or at least hopefully, will be 4 lanes. But don't be surprised if you run into US highways that are 2 lanes. And I cannot stress it enough. US highways, county highways, and state highways almost invariably are going through the middle of the states. They're going through the arteries of the states. So you're going to have to go through areas where you're having to speed up, slow down, be mindful of speed traps, and more importantly, be mindful of the fact that you might be in places that may not always be receptive to you being there. Then we had interstates. And interstates were great because invariably, they're the only ones that has the red, white, and blue designation. So you already know which they are. They were great because they were the only ones that had rest areas, most of them. Some of your US highways may have some rest areas, but almost all of your interstates had rest areas. And they all had access to gas stations that were pretty much open 24 hours a day. So that was the perfect thing. But you needed to know that so that you knew how to travel accordingly. And as a member of Black Generation X, it took on even a greater meaning because let's just be clear. If you're driving a back road, for those of you who have never heard of the word sundown towns, sundown towns was a phrase that, and I'm not going to use the exact phrase, but effectively the phrase went, black person, you better not be in town when the sun goes down. Because that was a nice way of telling you if you are, harm is coming your way, whether it be incarceration, beatings, and in some cases, the worst case, death. Well, guess what? Even though the civil rights movement yielded all of this great legislation and we've now in a desegregated society, those attitudes still remain. And if you're a member of Black Generation X, you didn't always know what towns still harbored those sundown town mentalities. And in most instances, you may not even know which towns were unless somebody specifically told you. So you started learning, and I had to learn and be told that when you move through the South and you're heading into these small rural towns, be mindful of the speed limit and be mindful of the fact to not put yourself in harm's way so that if something happens, nobody can get to you and provide you the assistance that you need. Now, you got your maps, you got your landmarks, you know your roads. Now let's take it on to your preparation and your survival. Keep in mind, first thing you need to know is how far can your car go? I can't even stress that enough. That sounds corny, but the reality is that if you're maneuvering, how far your car can go on a full tank of gas is going to make the determination of where you need to stop in advance to get gas along the way. And when you're looking at a map, especially if you know you're going to be going through these pockets of backwater areas where there's a good chance there may not be gas readily available, you could really find yourself jacked up when the check engine light comes on or the gas almost empty light that tells you got like 40 miles left and you're looking at the signs that's telling you the nearest town is 80 miles away. So you need to be mindful of that because strategically planning along the route where you're going to stop for gas became crucial. Food strategies was a must. I'm going to tell you, most of us didn't really take food with us because we were just mindful of where we would stop along the way. Keep in mind, and let me tell you, the story is worse if it's at night. Because if you're driving 12, 13 hours and you're leaving at night, you really have to be strategic. But let's say for my example, I would leave during the day. So if I'm leaving Pine Bluff, Arkansas at 6 o'clock in the morning, I need to be mindful, okay, if I'm going to get something to eat for lunch, where am I going to be at about good 4, 5, 6 hours into this trip? Because if I'm in a place like Mobile or maybe Jackson, finding someplace to eat is easy. But if I'm on the back roads and there's no schools or towns or anything in the area, I may find myself hungry for a while. So you needed to be mindful of where are those places that you're going to stop to eat, where are those places you're going to stop for gas, where are those places you're going to stop to use a bathroom. That sounds corny, but again, remember, this is not one of those things where you can get on the phone and call somebody or type in GPS to tell you where the nearest restaurant is or the nearest place to get something to eat is. You had to be mindful of where you were at, knowing that if you hit a particular spot and it was going to be a while, where you're just going to have to ride out accordingly and just be hungry. You also had to maximize your fatigue. And that also played in part to when you travel and how you travel. I can tell you, as somebody who made the travel back and forth, there were times I would leave Tampa after work at 5 o'clock and then drive all through the night to go home. You can imagine how crazy I looked by the time I got there. So I had to do techniques like, getting caffeine or eating sunflower seeds and chips and so forth, or chocolate to stay awake. Those were little tactics that I did. But when I had to come back, I often moved a little differently. So for the example that I'm showing you now, I would leave Pine Bluff about 6 o'clock in the morning. So this way I knew I would be pulling in to Tampa roughly around 9:30. So by that time, I would have spent the entire day alert, as opposed to trying to drive through the night right after work. These were these little strategies that you paid close attention to so that you could break it up along the way. So, and because I would leave at 6, I also was aware of where I would stop for gas, where I need to stop to get something to eat, and these would be the spots that I would stop to take a break to kind of catch my breath. The other final point with regards to the prep and survival is, remember, there was no phones. So that meant when I left, the only time the person would hear from me is either one, because I had stopped somewhere on the side of the road and I needed it and I called to pay for them, or when I got to my final destination. So it was important that when you got in the car and you told them you're going back, you weren't making no side trips, or you weren't running to the mall, you weren't going to a store. You were going straight there, because the person who you left, they're going to be waiting for your call. And they're going to be mindful that if they know it takes you 14 to 15 hours, like I would tell my mom, it's going to take me 15 hours because I got to, cross the time zone, but technically it's going to be 14. So if I told her I'm leaving here at 6 your time, I'll get to Tampa about 8:30 your time. So you should be looking around 8:30, anywhere between 8 to 9 for me to call. She would be waiting between 8 to 9 for me to call. So that's how we had to move. You have to understand, Generation X was built for independence. For all the things that we went through, this was our new normal. Remember, unlike what it was like in the past, where there were survival tips and things that you did in terms of maneuvering because of the fact that you had to deal with these stressors, we were now moving in this new world order. So we had to learn independence, and this independence just became a natural way of our normal existence. And if you're a Black Generation X, it took on a greater meaning, because we didn't know where the danger spots were. We had an idea. We had family members who would share with us about places, and more importantly, they would share with us things that we needed to do when we moved in those spaces. So for us, it took on a greater degree of significance, because not only was it about us being independent, it's about us surviving as well.